let's look at some information on the impact of just one type of AT. There's quite a bit of research out there, and I had to narrow down to what we could include in the time we have today. So I decided to just look at text-to-speech. And I want to give you some ammunition that you can use with your building administrators and your assigned leaders to help them understand the importance of assistive technology. So text-to-speech does several things. This study by Stodden, Roberts, Takahashi, Park, and Stodden out of the University of Hawaii looked at text-to-speech and how it helped kids with learning disabilities at high school. They found that it increased vocabulary, increased reading speed, provided exposure to correct pronunciation, which is really critical. But they also found it needs to be used for at least 40 minutes per week for one semester before you start to see its impact. And they determined in looking at students and their progress that using text-to-speech allows more room in the student's active memory for constructive meaning. So if a student is struggling to decode text so much that it's using their active memory for every bit of deciphering what that printed word is, they have no room to think about the meaning. And we know then they don't do well on our standardized tests because of that. It also leaves students less fatigued, excuse me, if they're using text-to-speech. Another study that I really like is the Iowa Text Reader Longitudinal Study, because they did it over the course of 2 years. And they found that when using text-to-speech, students accessed twice as much text within the same amount of time. The amount of text they accessed was almost twice as much, well, really over twice as much, when they were looking at text-to-speech versus a paper text. And I liked it because what they did was alternate weeks of doing a paper probe or a text-to-speech probe. They found that comprehension improved, and students demonstrated improved comprehension scores on both factual and inferential comprehension questions. One of the things they found that I didn't type on here is that the first year they saw that it took about 12 weeks before students really started to benefit from text-to-speech and get comfortable with it. And the second year with returning students, it still took several weeks. It wasn't as long, but they didn't walk into school that first day of school and suddenly be competent and comfortable with text-to-speech. They had a learning curve again after the summer. And so both of these studies tell us that it takes time, and that our little trial of a few days or a few weeks is probably not showing us how beneficial text-to-speech can be for students. Just more research on text-to-speech. There's a lot of studies out there, and I think we'll continue to see more. They show that text-to-speech increases reading comprehension and reading rate, and that using it also may increase the students' time spent on reading because it's not as tiring, it's not as boring, it's not as frustrating. So it really does make a difference. One of the questions I know a lot of you have, and that I've always had, is does text-to-speech impact reading when not using it? And there's another preliminary study, again out of University of Hawaii, that found that struggling readers, including many with a learning disability, actually did have improved function from using text-to-speech even when they weren't using it. So on state assessments or sometime when they didn't have access to text-to-speech, they still had increases in vocabulary and comprehension compared to students who didn't get to use text-to-speech at all. One limitation of this study was that there was a real range. Some of those students had 582 minutes per semester, and some had over 2,000 minutes per semester. So it's a little hard to say whether more time with text-to-speech provided more increase or not. There was no way to differentiate that. So it's a kind of study that I would be looking for in the future to tell us a little more about its impact. These are some facts that I've gathered from reviewing the literature, and I have to apologize because I do not have the reference for this. I lost it and I haven't been able to find it, but I still want to share it with you. Text-to-speech works best for students with slower, inaccurate decoding that does not correlate to their cognitive and intellectual potential. If they're reading with less than 90% accuracy, they're more likely to benefit from text-to-speech. It also is more likely to benefit a student with lower level of fluency, again, below about 92 words per minute. If they're reading more than that, they may not want to use text-to-speech, or it may not make enough difference for them that they're willing to continue using it. It's best for students with high levels of listening comprehension that can really be activated by hearing that information through text-to-speech. And for those with low levels of confidence and or an internal motivation that have led to reluctance and withdrawal in kids that really just don't want to read. Another interesting thing to think about is that text-to-speech really works for students with pacing and attentional difficulties, because that can be kind of regulated with text-to-speech. If they tend to wander, it can pull them back and help them refocus on the words. And it's really good for students who have needed to read and reread their text multiple times. So just some information I'm hoping you can use in recruiting the support of your administrators. Some of you might have been thinking, well, what about audiobooks? She's only talking about text-to-speech. I worked recently with school psychologists from Texas, and in Texas, they now have a law that they have to provide audiobooks to students with dyslexia, and that is the wording in the law. So audiobooks can have a positive impact. I believe that text-to-speech is more powerful, but it can be a good way to increase vocabulary. What Beck, McKeon, and Kukan in their book on reading say is that good readers read about 60 minutes a day for fun, beyond the school assignment that they're required to do. And struggling readers read about 1 minute per day. They try to avoid it. This leaves the struggling readers with a real deficit in what they identified as tier 2 vocabulary. So tier 1 vocabulary is the kind of words we use all the time in daily conversation. But tier 2 words are those higher level words that you only really find in textbooks, and they're rarely used in oral language. Hearing text aloud can really increase comprehension and knowledge of content. It can increase vocabulary and improve accuracy and fluency in visual reading. So I think it's a good thing to use audiobooks. I think that it's not enough for some kids, and we really do need text-to-speech. But you know, a lot of adults choose audiobooks for a pleasant way to get information from books. And Learning Ally, who's one of the big providers of audiobooks, tells us that their data shows that 33 days of reading, at least 20 minutes a day, is really needed to progress to higher reading levels. So it's important to use it daily and for at least 20 minutes each day if you want to have an impact from audiobooks. I want to look just a minute at some broader research. It is still on high incidence, but it's not specific just to learning disabilities. But a few years ago, Bauk looked at a longitudinal study about students with disabilities after they finished school. And what she found was that those who had used AT had about a 99.8% graduation rate, and those equivalent students with disabilities who did not have AT only had about 79.6% graduation rate. As far as going on to post-secondary settings, those who had used AT, they found that 80.9% of them went on, but those who didn't use AT, only 40% went on. And another really challenging finding is that those who ended up with paying jobs later in life, 80% of those who had used AT found paying jobs, and only 50% who didn't use AT did. Now, there's no causative relation here. We can't prove that the use of assistive technology is what caused those differences, but it is interesting to look at and to think about that it could be part of that difference. Another little study that I love was by Watson, Ito, Smith, and Anderson, and that's your Roger Smith from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee who did this study. And they looked at progress on IEP goals for middle school students, and they found AT's contribution was greater than any of other 9 intervention strategies they looked at. It was powerful, and it made a big difference in that students' performance and their achievement of IEP goals. And they found that the team approach is most effective. Some more recent research out of Georgia Tech University from Ben Satterfield takes another look at assistive technology and looking at how important it is in school, high school, to have mastered your AT. They again looked at students with high incidence disabilities, and they define mastery as being comfortable and familiar. So comfort came from being competent and confident in using their AT, and those who were comfortable and familiar with AT demonstrated much higher performance in the post-secondary settings, and I'll show you some data in just a second. And they suggested that if teachers and school administrators in K through 12 appropriately apply AT, students with high incidence disabilities will more likely demonstrate a greater likelihood of graduation and advantages as they transition to college or technical school. Confidence really comes when a student attains a comfort level with the AT tools they use, and that's a critical point. They have to have it long enough in high school to achieve comfort, confidence, competence. This was their data that Satterfield found, that for students who met this criteria of being comfortable with their assistive technology, 80.77% of them either maintained the GPA that they'd had in high school or it went up. Only 19% of them in college had their GPA go down. Well, when they looked at students who used AT but were uncomfortable with it, so they had not been competent, they had not been successful, that only 47.62% of them had their GPA go up or stay the same, while 52.36% had their GPA go down. So again, this past success in high school, this confidence and comfort is really critical. One of the interesting things in the Satterfield study is that almost 70% of the students who reported being comfortable also reported being self-taught, and that they had not received assistive technology in high school, but had learned to use it themselves. So what we really want is all of our students who need assistive technology to graduate with enough experience to be comfortable and competent. So as an emergent leader, as an AT service provider, what's your role in creating this excellence? I think it's really in informing and explaining to those administrators about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what students are getting AT, how it's working, and requesting the kinds of support, the specific things you might need. And really providing data on student progress. I think it's so critical that we share our successes with students and let people in authority know what a difference it's making. You can also help identify staff training needs and report those to that administrator or those administrators with whom you're working. You can recommend the types of training and trainers who can provide it. That may be you, but it may be someone else. What's needed in your school, and how can you communicate that to your administrators? And you can certainly contribute to long-range planning and thinking of how it can be and how you will get there. And always, always celebrating successes and make sure that they're widely known. Only you can really ask the questions that we started with early on of talking to your administrators and finding out what they perceive about assistive technology in their school. I wanted to suggest 2 resources to you for helping to set the vision. They were both developed by the Hyde Park Day School outside of Chicago, and they were developed for parents, but I find them quite wonderful with administrators and teachers. They're short, they're very well done and very specific. First is about AT for reading for students with learning disabilities, and the second about AT for writing. And I think that you will find them useful. I didn't really have time today to show you, but I wanted to suggest those resources to you. Leadership has a real impact on excellence. Both you and your administrators can work together to develop and maintain what's good about your programs, but to improve services across your district. You can help staff and students and families develop a vision of what ATUs can be and to communicate that widely so that teachers and families value AT and what it can do for their children. You can help support staff in using AT to improve education of students with disabilities and to recognize that it doesn't mean giving up. It means showing other ways to do things while they're learning new skills. And you can help develop a culture where AT is valued and used, and it will be a valuable use of your time to work on creating that culture. And certainly to facilitate collaboration between individuals and departments and different buildings and anyone that can work together to make your programs more effective. So what are your actions for AT, you as an AT leader? Recruit the support of your assigned leaders and administrators. Report regularly to them about your service model and what you're doing and how it's working and what you want to do next. Collect and analyze and please share data about what you're doing with staff. No administrator has a way of knowing how you spend your time until you tell them, until you explain how much time it takes to do this, where there's a real need for training, how much time you spent trying to make this happen over here. They don't know unless you tell them. Discuss goals and activities with your administrator for your team, for yourself, to identify how you can support each other in really leading AT services. And suggest outreach activities that might encourage collaboration with other parts of your agency, whether that's the curriculum department or the IT department or whatever it might be. One of the things that I like to remind us all is that if you don't give people information, they'll make something up to fill the void. And I think that's been so true of AT. People who don't know what it is have seen it and made their own decisions. So that is the end of my slides. And I have some time for questions. Let's see.
If you stop sharing, Penny,
right,
then,
that is what I need to do. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. What great information.
Well,
we have time to chat, people. So let's chat a little bit. You're welcome to unmute, or you can go ahead and put your question in the chat if you would prefer.
This is
Emily?
Emily. I'll just make a comment right now. This is very timely presentation. I'm very excited. A colleague and I actually plan to present to the administrators next Tuesday. And we've kind of put a slide presentation together, but I definitely am taking notes today and will add a little bit more to what we had planned already. So thank you very much for all of this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for that feedback. I'm so glad it was time for you. And remember, you're the cheerleader that can do it. You're the only one that knows. Who else has a comment or a question? Surely there's someone. I see something in the chat.
Yep. Are there any statistics about how many AT staff hours are needed per student population? Ooh.
Oh, there's not. And Kathy, you're a good one to talk to them about how important it is to tell your administrators the kinds of things you have to do. I mean, Kathy started out with just a few hours for AT. And each time we had to say, come on, Kathy, you can do it. Tell them what you do. Tell them how long it takes to do this and that, because they don't know.
No. You know, it's funny as you were saying that, because that was one of the things that I thought about. It's like years ago, it's exactly what you told me. You should write down everything that you do and give it a name. How much time are you material handling? How much time are you teaching kids? How many times are you teaching staff? And it made a huge difference. It got me a full-time position in my district where I stayed for 33 years. So it's important.
We don't guarantee that, but it's the only way it can happen, because there's nothing in their training that would tell them the time it takes you to do something. And I'm sorry, I don't know any data about a ratio. I think it would vary highly in the districts, depending on the kinds of support you have and the knowledge and skill levels of the teachers with whom you're dealing. So I don't know if we could have a ratio or not.